I'm Mila Moore, 28, an Army medic. I returned to my family's vineyard in California because my father fell gravely ill. My brother called me a traitor for leaving home to join the military. But the very man who claimed to be the guardian of our legacy was the one who set it all on fire. When the blaze threatened to consume the farm and dozens of lives, he stood frozen with fear. I, the traitor, had to use my battlefield skills to save them. Then the cruelest twist was revealed. This wasn't an accident. He had deliberately burned the place down to sell the land and pay off gambling debts. He thought his crime was buried in the flames, but he miscalculated one thing. I found the proof. If it were you, would you expose your own brother's crime to seek justice? Follow to see the traitor pay. The California sun, usually a welcome golden embrace, felt like a judgment on my skin. Every mile marker I passed on Highway 101 amplified the knot in my stomach. Sonoma Valley, a place I'd once yearned to escape, now pulled me back with the urgent, heavy hand of family obligation. Sergeant Mila Moore, Army medic, reporting for duty at a failing vineyard. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Mila, is that really you?" Aunt Sophia, her face a roadmap of worry lines, met me at the dusty entrance to the Moore family vineyard. Her hug was tight, smelling of lavender and old wine. "Oh, honey, it's good to see you. But the circumstances," I forced a smile. "Just Mila, Aunt Sophia. What's going on with Dad?" The message was vague. "Your father's heart, it's not good, dear. The doctors say the stress of the vineyard is making it worse. Your brother Noah, he's trying, but..." She trailed off, glancing towards the main house, a grand old Victorian that looked increasingly dilapidated. Noah, my older brother. The self-proclaimed keeper of the Moore legacy, who saw my enlistment as a personal betrayal. Abandoning us, he'd called it, his voice thick with a resentment that had only deepened with time and distance. I joined the Army right out of high school, seeking purpose, a challenge, a world beyond grapevines and harvest schedules. He'd stayed, inheriting the burden, and with it, a chip on his shoulder the size of a redwood. As I stepped out of my truck, the familiar scent of fermenting grapes mixed with something else, a faint, acrid smell I couldn't quite place. The vineyard, usually a vibrant tapestry of green and purple, looked tired, the vines listless, the ground cracked. This place was bleeding money, I could tell. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," a voice drawled from the porch. Noah, taller than me, with a perpetual scowl etched into his features. His arms were crossed, a half-empty bottle of local ale clutched in one hand. His t-shirt was stained, his hair disheveled. He looked less like a vineyard manager and more like someone barely holding it together. "Noah," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's good to see you too," he scoffed. "Don't bother with the pleasantries, little sister. You didn't come back for a family reunion. What, did Uncle Sam finally decide you weren't cut out for barking orders and patching up grunts?" The old anger flared, but I tamped it down. "Dad's sick. I came because he needs me, and because this is my home too." "Home?" He took a long swig from his bottle. "Funny, I don't remember you sticking around when things got tough. You ran off, played soldier, left me to deal with all this." He gestured vaguely at the struggling vineyard. "Now you waltz back in, probably expecting a hero's welcome." "I expect nothing," I retorted, "except maybe a little less bitterness." Aunt Sophia stepped between us, her voice gentle but firm. "Children, please, your father needs peace, not this arguing. Mila, your dad's in his study, he's been asking for you." I nodded, grateful for the reprieve. As I walked past Noah, he muttered, "Don't think you can just come back and fix everything, Mila. Some things are too broken." His words stung, but I pushed them aside. Dad, that was my priority. He was sitting at his old mahogany desk, surrounded by ledgers and maps of the vineyard. His usually robust frame looked shrunken, his once vibrant eyes now dull and shadowed. The sight of him, so frail, twisted my gut. "Dad," he looked up, a slow, tired smile spreading across his face. "Mila, my girl, you came." I knelt beside his chair, taking his thin hand in mine. "Of course I came. How are you feeling?" "Like a wine barrel left out in the sun too long," he chuckled weakly. "Empty, drained." His gaze drifted to the window, where the parched hills stretched towards the horizon. "The vineyard, it's been a tough year. The drought, the market, Noah's doing his best, but..." "I know," I said, squeezing his hand. "I'll help, I'm here now." He looked at me, a glimmer of his old spark returning. "You always were the strong one, Mila. Your mother's spirit through and through?" He sighed. "I just wish you and Noah could find a way to work together." "We will," I lied, knowing how deep the rift ran. Over the next few days, I tried to immerse myself in vineyard life, but it felt alien. My military training had honed my senses, made me acutely aware of details, of potential threats. Here, the threats were more insidious: declining yields, mounting debts, the strained silence between my brother and me. I met some of the longtime vineyard workers, men and women whose families had been tending these lands for generations. There was Matteo, the stoic foreman, his hands gnarled from years of pruning. He greeted me with a respectful nod, a flicker of something almost like hope in his eyes. "Good to have another pair of hands, Mila," he said, his voice gravelly. "Things are getting difficult." Then there was Alina, Matteo's daughter, a vivacious woman in her late 20s who handled the vineyard's marketing and sales, or tried to. She had a keen business mind, but the lack of resources was clearly stifling her efforts. "It's like trying to sell water in a desert, Mila," she confessed over coffee one morning. "We have a good product, but we're drowning in debt, and Noah. He's just not listening to new ideas." And there was also Miguel, a young, earnest worker, barely out of his teens, who seemed to idolize Noah despite his failings. Miguel, with wide, innocent eyes, always seemed to be doing whatever Noah asked, no questions asked. I spent my days trying to understand the financial mess, poring over ledgers that made my head spin. Noah was rarely around, often disappearing for hours, returning with bloodshot eyes and an even fouler mood. When he was here, he'd bark orders, dismiss my suggestions, and constantly remind me that I was a soldier, not a farmer. "You don't get it, Mila," he'd snap, throwing his hands up in frustration during one of our heated discussions about crop rotation. "This isn't some battlefield where you can just order people around. This is nature. It has its own rules. And those rules include basic economics and proper agricultural practices, which seem to be missing here, Noah." I shot back, pointing to a ledger showing a massive dip in sales from the previous quarter. "We need to diversify, find new markets, not just keep doing the same thing and expecting different results." He slammed his fist on the table. "I'm doing my best. You think it's easy? You think I want to be buried under this debt? This is my responsibility, my burden, not yours, Sergeant Moore. Go back to your wars." The tension between us was a palpable, suffocating thing. It hung over every meal, every conversation. Dad, growing weaker, seemed to shrink further into himself, unable to mediate. Aunt Sophia tried her best to keep the peace, but even her endless supply of comfort food couldn't mend the deep-seated animosity. One sweltering afternoon, as I was helping Matteo prune some neglected vines, a plume of smoke appeared on the horizon. At first, it was just a smudge, easily dismissed as a controlled burn from a neighboring property. But within minutes, it grew, darkening the sky, sending a chill down my spine despite the oppressive heat. Matteo straightened up, his eyes narrowed. "That's not good, Mila. That's too close to the national forest." My military training kicked in immediately. I felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the analytical part of my brain assessing the situation. "Where's Noah?" "He went into town, said he had a meeting," Matteo replied, a hint of concern in his voice. The wind shifted, carrying the acrid smell I'd noticed days ago, stronger now, undeniably the smell of burning wood. My heart began to pound. This wasn't just a smudge. This was something serious. I grabbed my phone, trying Noah's number, but it went straight to voicemail. I called Alina, then Aunt Sophia, telling them to start getting things ready for evacuation. Panic was starting to bubble in the periphery, but I pushed it down. There was no time for it. The smoke grew thicker, the sky turning an ominous orange. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer then fading. The fire was spreading fast. When Noah finally pulled up, his truck kicking up a cloud of dust, he looked agitated not just by the fire but by something else, something hidden. He spotted me, his eyes widening. "What's going on? What's going on?" I yelled, incredulous. "There's a fire, Noah, a big one. It's heading this way." He stared at the rapidly approaching smoke, his jaw slack. A fire, but it wasn't supposed to, not like this. He mumbled something under his breath, something I couldn't quite catch. "What did you say?" I demanded. "Nothing," he snapped, running a hand through his hair. "Just damn it, what do we do?" His usual bravado had evaporated, replaced by raw fear. This was exactly the kind of chaos I'd been trained for. My medic skills extended beyond patching wounds. They were about assessment, triage, organization in the face of disaster. "We need to organize an evacuation," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. "Get everyone together. We need to create a fire break around the property, move anything flammable, and warn the neighbors." Noah just stood there, paralyzed, staring at the inferno devouring the horizon. "Evacuate? Where will we go? This is our home. The vineyard, it'll be gone." His fear was contagious, threatening to infect the few workers who were starting to gather. Alina rushed up, her face pale. "Mila, the local news just confirmed it's a massive wildfire. They're calling for mandatory evacuations in the lower valley." "Noah, snap out of it." I grabbed his shoulders, shaking him. People are in danger. Our family is in danger. We need to act now. He finally seemed to register my words, but his eyes were still wide with a terror that wasn't just about the fire. But what about the property? I can't lose this. I can't. I knew then that I couldn't rely on him. Not now. I had to take charge. Listen up, I barked, my voice projecting with the authority I'd learned in the military. Matteo, Alina, and a few other workers turned to me, their eyes filled with a mixture of fear and a desperate hope. We have a critical situation on our hands. This is not a drill. We need to move fast and smart if we want to save anyone and anything. Matteo stepped forward. What do we do, Mila? First, communication. Alina, get on the phone. Coordinate with the emergency services, find out evacuation routes, shelters, and start calling our closest neighbors. Tell them to get out now. Alina, looking relieved to have direction, nodded and pulled out her phone. Matteo, I continued, we need a defensive perimeter. We'll use the tractor and any heavy equipment we have to clear a fire break along the eastern edge of the vineyard, where the fire is closest. Miguel, you help Matteo. Miguel, who had been hovering near Noah, seemed to jolt awake at my direct command. He nodded vigorously, grabbing a shovel. Noah, I turned to my brother, my voice firm despite the underlying frustration, you know the layout of this place better than anyone. We need to move all flammable materials away from the main buildings, gasoline, propane tanks, anything that can ignite. Focus on the cellar and the main house. And for God's sake, help Dad and Aunt Sophia get to safety. He just stood there for a moment, mouth agape, before finally stumbling towards the house. His movements were slow, hesitant, as if he were walking through a nightmare. The rest of you, I addressed the remaining workers, we're going to wet down the roofs and the immediate perimeter of all structures. Get hoses, buckets, anything. Every drop of water counts. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but the training took over. I was back in command, assessing, delegating, moving. This wasn't some distant battlefield. This was my home, my family, my community, and I wasn't going to let it burn. As I helped Miguel and Matteo clear brush, the air grew thick with smoke and ash. The roar of the approaching fire was like a living beast, growing louder with every passing minute. We could hear the crackle and pop of trees exploding, the terrifying sound of nature consumed. Mila, Matteo gasped, wiping sweat and ash from his brow. It's moving faster than I've ever seen. We might not have time for a proper break. I looked at the inferno closer now, a monstrous wall of orange and red. I saw isolated pockets of flame leaping ahead, carried by the wind, embers, sparks, igniting dry brush like tinder. That acrid smell, it was more than just natural wildfire. It was sharp, chemical, almost like an accelerant. A chilling thought pricked at the back of my mind, but there was no time to dwell on it. We improvise, I shouted over the roar of the fire. Focus on creating a defensible space around the structures. Every foot we clear is a foot gained. Miguel, get those water pumps going, make sure we have pressure. Alina, any news from the fire department? Alina rushed up, her face streaked with soot. They're overwhelmed, Mila. They said they're prioritizing populated areas. We're pretty far out, they might not get here in time. Despair threatened to wash over me, but I pushed it back. This was not the time to crumble. All right, I said, my voice resolute, then we fight it ourselves. This community has always looked out for each other. Now's the time to prove it. I looked around at the faces of our small crew, fearful, exhausted, but also looking to me for direction. I saw not just vineyard workers, but neighbors, friends. We need more help, I declared. Alina, get back on those calls. Contact every neighbor within a 5-mile radius. Tell them what's happening, tell them we're organizing. We're creating a community fire line. If they can't evacuate, tell them to come here. We'll protect each other. Noah, meanwhile, was struggling to load some old furniture into his truck, his movements clumsy, his eyes unfocused. We should just go, Mila. It's too big, we'll lose everything. We're not leaving until everyone who can be saved is safe. I snapped, my patience with him wearing thin. This isn't just about property, Noah, it's about lives. Suddenly, a voice cut through the smoke and panic. Mila, we're here. It was Sarah, a neighbor from the next vineyard over, her truck pulling up with 2 other families crammed inside. They had hoses, shovels, buckets, a motley crew, but their arrival was a beacon of hope. We got your message, Alina, Sarah shouted, rushing towards us. What do you need us to do? More trucks followed, one by one, bringing a dozen more people, a few tractors, and a renewed sense of purpose. The community was responding. My military training, focusing on leadership under pressure, on turning chaos into order, kicked into high gear. All right, everyone, I yelled, pointing towards the approaching fire. Listen up, we're going to form teams. Team Alpha with Matteo, you're on the main fire break line with the tractors. Team Beta with Sarah, you're on hose duty, wetting down structures. Team Gamma, we're going to clear brush around the main house and cellar. Noah, I need you to lead Team Gamma. Focus on getting everything out of the cellar that's flammable. Dad's medical supplies are in there too. Elena, you're our communications hub, keep relaying information, coordinate with anyone else who calls. Miguel, you're with me, we're going to focus on hot spots and preventing embers from spreading. My voice, clear and commanding, seemed to cut through the panic, giving everyone a sense of purpose. I could see the fear in their eyes, but also a glimmer of determination. We were a ragtag army, facing a formidable enemy, but we were unified. As the afternoon wore on, the air became unbreathable. Ash rained down like black snow. The heat radiating from the inferno was scorching, even hundreds of yards away. My throat was raw, my eyes stinging, but I kept moving, shouting instructions, hauling hoses, directing the efforts. Noah, though still visibly shaken, was finally moving with some purpose, directing Team Gamma. He seemed to respond to the clear, direct commands, reverting to a default state of following orders rather than giving them. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Suddenly, a frantic shout. Mila, over here, Mr. Henderson's house, it's surrounded. It was Alina, pointing to a small farmhouse about half a mile away, barely visible through the smoke. Old Mr. Henderson, a reclusive widower, lived there alone. He was too frail to evacuate on his own. My heart lurched. Noah, I need your truck, we need to get him out. Noah hesitated, looking at the approaching flames. It's too dangerous, Mila, the fire's almost there. I don't care, I yelled, running towards his truck. We're not leaving anyone behind. Mateo, always reliable, jumped into the passenger seat. I'm with you, Mila. Miguel, keep everyone focused on the fire break, I shouted back. I slammed the truck into gear, the tires spitting gravel. The smoke was so thick, I could barely see the road. The heat was intense, even inside the cabin. My mind raced, assessing risks, planning the fastest route, the safest approach. This was what I was trained for: rapid assessment, decisive action under extreme pressure. As we neared Mr. Henderson's house, the scene was apocalyptic. Flames licked at the porch, smoke billowed from the windows. The air was a suffocating shroud of heat and ash. Stay in the truck, Mila. Mateo yelled, but I was already out, running towards the front door, pulling a handkerchief over my mouth. Mr. Henderson, can you hear me? I pounded on the door. A faint cough from inside. I pushed the door open, the heat rushing out, smelling of burnt wood in desperation. The living room was filled with smoke, visibility almost zero. Mr. Henderson, I called out, my voice raspy. I found him slumped in his armchair, a blanket clutched to his chest, his eyes wide with fear and disorientation. He was struggling to breathe. We need to go, sir, I said, trying to lift him. He was heavier than I expected, and his legs were weak. My cat wears whiskers, he wheezed, looking around frantically. No time for that, sir. We have to go now, I tried to explain, but he was fixated on his pet. Just then, Mateo appeared, pulling a small, terrified tabby cat from under a sofa. Got her, Mila, let's move. Together, we half-carried, half-dragged Mr. Henderson out of the burning house and into the relative safety of the truck. Mateo secured the cat in a carrier. As I looked back, the roof of the farmhouse collapsed with a roar, sending a shower of sparks into the air. We had gotten out just in time. Back at the vineyard, the community fire line was holding, thanks to the concerted efforts of everyone. The fire was still raging, but it hadn't breached our main defenses. Weariness etched itself onto every face, but there was also a fierce determination. We saved him, I gasped, pulling off my smoky handkerchief as I returned to the main house. Aunt Sophia rushed forward, hugging me tightly. Oh, Mila, you're a miracle worker. Are you hurt? Just a little smoke, I assured her. Dad was sitting on the porch, looking at me with a newfound respect in his eyes. Even Noah, for once, didn't have a snide remark. He just looked at me, a flicker of something I couldn't quite decipher in his gaze, perhaps awe, perhaps shame. The battle wasn't over. The fire continued to rage through the night, but the community, under my direction, had established a rotating watch, constantly wetting down hot spots and reinforcing the fire break. Exhaustion was setting in, but the knowledge that we were fighting together, saving lives, fueled us. As dawn broke, painting the smoke-filled sky in hues of angry orange and deep purple, the roar of the fire finally began to subside. In the distance, we could hear the welcome sound of actual fire engines, their sirens growing closer. Reinforcements had arrived. We had won the battle, at least for now. But the war, I knew, was far from over. And as I looked at the scorched earth beyond our miraculously saved vineyard, a new, unsettling question formed in my mind. That acrid smell. That abnormal speed, this fire felt different. It felt intentional. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The fire chief, a grizzled veteran named Miller, surveyed the scene with weary eyes. His crew, exhausted but efficient, began dousing the lingering embers. He nodded towards me. "Heard you were quite the general out here, Sergeant Moore. Good work. Could have been a lot worse without your leadership." I just nodded, too tired to feel proud. "We did what we had to, Chief." "Indeed." He kicked at a patch of blackened earth at the edge of our fire break. "This fire, it's behaving oddly. Started fast, spread faster. And the point of origin, it's not natural." He looked at me, his gaze sharp. "Found traces of accelerant." My blood ran cold. The chilling thought from last night solidified into a horrifying suspicion. Accelerant. Intentional. My eyes instinctively darted to Noah, who was standing a little ways off, talking to Aunt Sophia. He avoided my gaze. "Are you saying someone started this fire?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Chief Miller's expression was grim. "That's what the preliminary evidence suggests. We've got investigators coming in. This wasn't just a wildfire, Sergeant. This was arson." The word hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Arson. And Noah's strange behavior, his mumbled words about it not being supposed to not like this. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Over the next few days, the immediate danger passed, but the tension lingered, thick as the smoke still hanging in the air. The vineyard was scarred, the surrounding landscape a desolate wasteland, but our buildings, our home, and most of our vines had been miraculously spared thanks to the community's efforts. The investigators arrived, two stoic men in beige uniforms who meticulously combed through the burn site. They asked questions, took samples, and generally made everyone uneasy. Noah grew increasingly withdrawn, snapping at anyone who came near him. He spent most of his time locked in his room or wandering the fringes of the property, staring out at the devastation with a haunted look in his eyes. I watched him, every suspicious action confirming my worst fears. He wasn't just grieving for the land, he was carrying a secret, and it was eating him alive. One evening, I found Alina sorting through charred marketing materials in the vineyard office. "It's a miracle, isn't it?" she said, looking up at me. "I honestly thought we were going to lose everything. You saved us, Mila." "We all saved us, Alina," I corrected, though a small part of me appreciated her words. "But something's not right. Did you notice anything strange before the fire? Anything at all?" She paused, biting her lip. "Well, Noah's been acting really stressed lately, more than usual, and he's been making a lot of phone calls in secret, whispering, leaving the room. It struck me as odd." "Secret calls to whom?" I pressed. "I don't know," she shrugged. "Never heard names, but he seemed very agitated after them, and I also overheard him talking to someone a few weeks ago outside about the deal and getting out of debt. He sounded desperate." "The deal?" I repeated, my mind racing. "Did you hear anything else?" "Just that he seemed worried about a deadline, and that it involved the land. He mentioned the North 40 specifically." The North 40 was a particularly fertile section of our vineyard, bordering a rapidly developing area. My heart sank. Noah was in debt. Gambling debt, probably, and he was making secret deals about selling off family land. The pieces were starting to fit, forming a picture I didn't want to see. Later that night, unable to sleep, I decided to do some investigating of my own. Noah's room was usually a disaster zone, but lately he'd been oddly meticulous about locking it. Tonight, however, in his haste, he'd left the door ajar. I slipped inside. The room was dark, smelling faintly of stale beer and desperation. I moved silently, my eyes scanning, my military training making me hyper-aware of my surroundings. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just a clue, anything that could confirm my growing suspicions. Under a pile of clothes, I found a crumpled, official-looking document. My hands trembled as I smoothed it out. It was a preliminary sales agreement for the North 40 acres of the Moore family vineyard. The buyer, Sterling Properties, a notoriously ruthless real estate development firm, and the signature at the bottom, Noah Moore. But what truly made my stomach churn was the addendum, scribbled in the margin: "Finalized sale upon confirmation of property devaluation due to unforeseen circumstances." Unforeseen circumstances, a wildfire. My brother had sold off family land, and he was counting on a devaluation to seal the deal. And the accelerant, the controlled burn that got out of hand. It all clicked into place with sickening clarity. My own brother had tried to burn down our home. Not just to sell off a piece of the land, but to force us to sell the rest of it, to drive down the value of what remained, making it easier for him to get his payout from Sterling Properties. He hadn't just been negligent, he'd been malicious. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just about debt. It was about betrayal, about a deep-seated rot that had festered in my brother's heart. I carefully folded the document and tucked it into my pocket. My mind raced, trying to process this devastating truth. How could I confront him? How could I tell Dad, who was already so frail, that his son had done this? The next morning, the investigators requested to speak with Noah again. He emerged from the interview looking even more haggard, his eyes darting around nervously. He saw me watching him from the porch, and a flicker of fear, quickly masked by defiance, crossed his face. "What are you looking at, Sergeant?" he sneered. "Just wondering when you were going to tell us about your little deal with Sterling Properties, Noah," I said, my voice dangerously calm, his face drained of color. What are you talking about?" I pulled the crumpled document from my pocket, unfolding it slowly. "This, the unforeseen circumstances clause. Pretty convenient, wouldn't you say? A massive wildfire just when you needed to devalue the property." He lunged for the paper, but I pulled it back, holding it out of his reach. "Don't even try it, I know everything." He staggered back, his bravado crumbling, replaced by a raw, desperate fear. "No, Mila, you don't understand. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand. It was supposed to be a small burn, just enough to scare Dad, to make him realize we had to sell. The debts, Mila, the gambling debts, they were huge, I had no choice." His confession hung in the air, a bitter, rancid truth. Aunt Sophia gasped, covering her mouth. Dad, who had been sitting on the porch, slowly rose, his eyes wide with horror, fixed on his son. You started the fire, Noah?" Dad's voice was a barely audible whisper, filled with a pain that ripped through my heart. "To sell our home, our legacy." Noah fell to his knees, burying his face in his hands. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. They were going to take everything anyway. I thought this was the only way to save us." His words were a pathetic excuse, but the raw anguish in his voice was undeniable. He was a broken man, consumed by his own failings. "You risked everything, Noah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You risked our lives, our neighbors' lives, for gambling debts?" A few of the vineyard workers, drawn by the commotion, stood silently, their faces a mixture of shock and anger. Mateo stepped forward, his eyes burning. "You would burn our homes, our livelihoods? After all we've given to this land." I made a mistake," Noah stammered, looking up, his face tear-streaked. "A terrible mistake." The arrival of the investigators cut short our painful confrontation. They had clearly overheard enough. Chief Miller, his face grim, approached Noah. "Mr. Moore, we need to ask you some more questions, down at the station." Noah offered no resistance. He was led away, a pathetic figure, his head bowed in shame. The aftermath was a blur of police reports, legal consultations, and a pervasive sense of grief. Dad, shattered by his son's betrayal, suffered another, more serious heart attack. He was rushed to the hospital, his condition critical. Aunt Sophia wept inconsolably. The community, who had rallied to save us, now looked on with a mixture of sympathy and anger. The Moore family, once a pillar of the valley, was now steeped in scandal. "I don't know how we'll ever recover from this, Mila," Aunt Sophia sobbed. "The vineyard, your father, everything." I looked out at the scarred landscape, then at our home, still standing thanks to our fight. And I thought of Dad, lying in a hospital bed, fighting for his life. And I thought of Noah, consumed by his own demons. This wasn't just a battle against fire anymore. It was a battle for our family's soul, for its future. I walked to Dad's study, sitting at his desk, surrounded by the ledgers that had once brought him so much joy and now represented such despair. I saw the passion in his neat handwriting, the dreams woven into every number. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I couldn't let it all crumble. My military training had taught me not just how to fight, but how to rebuild, how to adapt, how to lead, and how to inspire hope in the darkest of times. The next day, I called a meeting with the vineyard workers, with Alina, with Mateo, with Sarah, and the other neighbors who had helped us fight the fire. They gathered, a silent, somber group, unsure of what the future held. "I know this is hard," I began, my voice clear and steady, despite the turmoil in my heart. "What Noah did, it's unforgivable. And my father, he's fighting for his life." I paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "But this vineyard, this community. It's more than just one person's mistakes. It's generations of hard work, of dreams, of shared lives." I held up the sales agreement. "This document, it's evidence of Noah's betrayal, but it's also our opportunity. This land was almost stolen from us, but we fought, we saved it, and now we're going to rebuild it." I looked at each of their faces, searching for a spark, a flicker of hope. "I'm not a farmer, but I'm a leader. I know how to organize, how to strategize, how to get things done." and I know how to fight for what's right. I'm going to take over the vineyard, I declared, my voice resonating with a newfound resolve. I'll use my military connections to secure federal aid, disaster relief. We'll rebuild the damaged areas, we'll implement new, sustainable farming practices. Elena, your marketing ideas, we're going to put them into action. Mateo, your knowledge of the land, it's invaluable. And to all of you, our neighbors, our friends, who stood by us in our darkest hour. We're going to create something stronger, something better together. A murmur went through the crowd. Some looked skeptical, others cautiously optimistic. But then Mateo, the stoic foreman, stepped forward. I'm with you, Mila. This land, it's in our blood. We won't let it die. Sarah, the neighbor, nodded. You showed us what real leadership looks like, Mila. We'll help in any way we can. Elena, her eyes shining with renewed purpose, stepped forward. Let's do this, Mila. Let's show them what the Moore family vineyard is truly capable of. A wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. We were a community, bruised but not broken. Over the next few weeks, while Noah faced the legal consequences of his actions and Dad slowly began to recover in the hospital, I put my plan into action. I leveraged every contact I had, every resource I could find. My fellow soldiers, many of whom I'd helped in far more dangerous situations, answered my calls, providing advice, support, and even connecting me with agricultural experts and grant programs for veterans. I immersed myself in learning about viticulture, about sustainable farming, about business management. I worked alongside Mateo and Miguel, learning the intricacies of the vines, understanding the rhythm of the land. Elena became my right hand, developing new marketing strategies, reaching out to buyers, rebuilding our brand with a focus on resilience and community. We organized community work parties, clearing debris, planting new, drought-resistant varieties of grapes. The scorched earth slowly began to show signs of life, green shoots pushing through the black. Dad, upon his return from the hospital, was a changed man. Weakened, yes, but also filled with a quiet pride as he watched me lead, watched our community heal and rebuild. He saw the strength that had always been there, beneath the uniform, the strength he'd always admired in my mother. One afternoon, as I stood overlooking the vineyard, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow over the nascent green shoots, Dad came and stood beside me. Your mother would be so proud, Mila, he said, his voice stronger now. I'm proud of you. You didn't just save the vineyard, you saved us. You brought us back from the brink. We did it together, Dad, I replied, putting an arm around his frail shoulders. Noah, meanwhile, pleaded guilty to arson and attempted insurance fraud. He faced a difficult road ahead, but perhaps in facing the consequences, he would finally find a path to redemption. The Moore family vineyard was reborn, stronger and more vibrant than ever. It was a testament to resilience, to community, and to the power of leadership in the face of adversity. And as for me, Sergeant Mila Moore, the Army medic who came home to a crisis, I had finally found my new mission. Not on a battlefield, but right here, on the land I loved, surrounded by the people I loved. I was home, and I was exactly where I was meant to be. This was not just a vineyard, it was a symbol of hope, a testament to what we can achieve when we stand together, rooted in strength and reaching for the sun. Mila, Dad said, his eyes scanning the thriving vineyard, we should look into building a new tasting room, something modern but still reflective of our history. What do you think? I smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that reached my eyes. I think that's a fantastic idea, Dad. I've already got some blueprints in mind. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The weeks that followed were a testament to the resilience of both land and people. The acrid smell of smoke was gradually replaced by the scent of sawdust and fresh earth. Under the relentless California sun, new life began to tentatively push its way through the blackened soil. Green shoots, vibrant and defiant, emerged at the base of the scorched vines, a promise of future harvests. We, the people of the valley, mirrored that recovery. A rhythm was established, a rhythm of rebuilding. Tractors cleared debris, hammers echoed as fences were mended, and the low hum of conversation replaced the roar of the inferno. Our small community, forged in the crucible of the fire, had become a single, functioning unit. Sarah, from the neighboring vineyard, organized a rotating schedule for equipment sharing. Old Mr. Henderson, his house now just a foundation and a chimney, insisted on managing a tool share program from a tent on his property. His rescued cat, Whiskers, a fluffy mascot for our collective efforts. Elena, a whirlwind of energy, was on the phone constantly, negotiating with suppliers for discounted materials, and setting up a community website to track our progress and coordinate volunteers. Mateo and I were in the fields from dawn till dusk, assessing the vine damage, planning the long road to recovery. I was learning a new kind of command. It wasn't about barking orders and expecting immediate compliance. It was about listening, about consensus building, about understanding the delicate ecosystem of a community. My military experience provided the framework, logistics, planning, resource management, but the heart of it, the true leadership, came from the people around me. I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday, a crisp white envelope that felt cold and clinical in my hands. It was from the insurance company. I opened it in the office, with Alina looking over my shoulder. As I read the dense, legalistic paragraphs, the floor seemed to drop out from under me. Claim denied, I read aloud, my voice flat. Policy void due to familial involvement in the inciting incident. They're not giving us a dime. Alina sank into a chair, her face ashen. No, Mila, they can't do that. It wasn't your fault. It was Noah's. Doesn't matter, I said, crumpling the letter in my fist. He's family. He's on the policy. As far as they're concerned, the House of Moore tried to defraud them. We're on our own. The news hit us like a physical blow. The federal aid I'd managed to secure was a lifeline, but it was meant for disaster recovery, for replanting and infrastructure. It wouldn't cover the mountain of existing debt Noah had accrued, the debt that had driven him to such a desperate act in the first place. Without the insurance payout, we were financially exposed, vulnerable. That evening, I sat with Dad on the porch. His color had returned, and he was walking with a cane, but the news had stolen the light from his eyes. This is my fault, he said, his voice raspy. I should have seen what was happening with Noah. I was so focused on the vineyard, on the legacy, I didn't see my own son drowning. Don't do that, Dad, I said softly, taking his hand. Noah made his own choices. We can't carry his guilt for him. We can only carry on. But how, Mila? Without the insurance money? We'll find a way, I said, with more confidence than I felt. We always do. The next day, a sleek, black sedan, so out of place it looked like a spaceship, rolled up our dusty driveway. A man in a tailored, ridiculously expensive suit stepped out. He was tall, with slicked-back hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Mila Moore? He asked, extending a hand I had no intention of shaking. Marcus Hayes, Sterling Properties, I believe you're familiar with our prior interest in this land. My blood ran cold. This was the developer, the predator that had been circling. I know who you are, I said, my voice hard. What do you want? My condolences on your recent troubles, he said, his tone dripping with insincerity. A terrible tragedy, which of course creates, let's call it a unique business opportunity. He gestured at the recovering vineyard. You're in a tough spot. No insurance payout, I hear. A mountain of debt. A long, expensive road to recovery. It's a shame to see a family legacy crumble. Get to the point, I snapped. He chuckled, a dry, unpleasant sound. The point is, Ms. Moore, my offer still stands. In fact, given the circumstances, I'm prepared to make a new, more appropriate one. We'll buy the entire property, pay off all your debts. You and your family can walk away, free and clear. A fresh start. He named a figure. It was a fraction of what the land was worth, a predatory, insulting lowball. Get off my property, I said, my voice low and even. His smile faltered for a second. Don't be emotional, Ms. Moore. Be practical. You're a soldier. You understand tactical retreat. This is a battle you can't win. This offer is generous, and it won't be on the table forever. Wildfires have a way of happening again, you know. The valley is so very dry this time of year. The veiled threat hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He wasn't just a developer. He was a vulture, and he was threatening my home. My hands clenched into fists. Every instinct I had screamed to react, to escalate, but I held my ground. I gave him the same icy stare I'd given insurgents who thought they could intimidate me. I said, I repeated slowly, taking a step toward him, get off my property. Now. He held up his hands in mock surrender, the smirk returning to his face. As you wish, but think about it. When the banks come calling and your friendly neighbors get tired of working for free, my card will be on your doorstep. He slid a business card onto the porch railing and sauntered back to his car, leaving a trail of smug satisfaction in his wake. I stood there, trembling with rage, until the dust from his car had settled. This changed everything. We weren't just fighting debt and drought anymore. We had a new enemy, one with deep pockets and no conscience. That night, I called another community meeting. I laid it all out, the insurance denial, the scale of our debt, and the predatory offer from Sterling Properties. I told them about Hayes's threat. I didn't sugarcoat it, I owed them the truth. I can't ask you to keep working for free, I said, my voice heavy. I can't promise you that we'll win this. Sterling Properties will try to squeeze us to starve us out. This is going to be a long, hard fight. The room was silent for a moment. I could see the fear, the doubt in their eyes. Then Mr. Henderson, leaning on his cane, spoke up. That man, Hayes, he doesn't understand this place. He thinks it's just dirt. Just acres on a map. He doesn't see the history. He doesn't see us. He looked around the room. My house is gone, but my home is still here. With all of you, I'm not going anywhere. Sarah stood up. My family's vineyard would have been next if you hadn't stopped that fire. We owe you. We owe each other. We're in this together, Mila. Mateo, who had been standing silently in the back, stepped forward. This land has fed my family for 3 generations. We have faced pests, droughts, and bad markets. We will not be scared away by a man in a suit. One by one, they spoke, a chorus of defiance. They weren't just my neighbors, they were my soldiers. We were an army bound not by a flag but by the soil under our feet. Elena, ever the strategist, was already at a whiteboard we'd set up, scribbling notes. Okay, so we fight back. We can't compete with their money, so we compete with our story. We launch a campaign. The Valley that fought back. We create a co-op, pool our resources, share our profits. We go to the media, we expose Sterling's tactics. We turn our struggle into our brand. Her energy was infectious. The mood in the room shifted from despair to determination. Ideas began to fly. A farmer's market to sell directly to consumers. A vineyard recovery wine label with the story on the bottle. A crowdfunding campaign. I stood there, watching them, listening to them, and a fierce, unshakable resolve settled over me. Marcus Hayes was wrong. This wasn't a tactical retreat. This was our home ground. This was where we made our stand. All right, I said, my voice ringing with renewed strength. Let's get to work. They think we're broken. They think we're weak because we're covered in ash. I looked at the determined faces around me. We're going to show them what grows from the ashes. We're going to show them what this valley is truly made of. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. Our war room was the vineyard office, a space that had previously smelled of dust and old paper and now buzzed with the nervous energy of a command center. Elena, armed with a pack of multicolored dry erase markers, had turned the far wall into a sprawling battle plan. Webs of interconnected ideas, marketing slogans, and distribution channels covered the whiteboard. From the ashes, she'd scrawled in bold red letters at the top. Underneath it, a surprisingly artful sketch of a green sprout emerging from a blackened grapevine. It was our new logo, our defiant crest. The community's initial burst of defiant energy translated into a flurry of organized chaos. Sarah's tech-savvy 16-year-old son, Leo, built us a simple but powerful website overnight, featuring photos of the fire, the devastation, and, most importantly, the faces of the community working together to rebuild. Elena wrote a press release that was less a statement and more a declaration of war, telling the story of a small farming community standing up to a predatory developer. We launched a crowdfunding campaign, not just asking for money, but inviting people to invest in the resilience of the American farmer. The response was slow at first, a trickle of small donations from friends and family, but then a local news blogger picked up the story. Then a regional paper. The trickle became a steady stream. People weren't just donating, they were leaving messages of support, sharing their own stories of fighting against corporate Goliaths. We were no longer just a collection of vineyards, we were a cause. Despite this small victory, the shadow of Marcus Hayes and Sterling Properties loomed large. His threat wasn't idle. One morning, a team of surveyors appeared at our property line, driving stakes into the ground with an air of arrogant authority. It was a clear act of intimidation, a visual reminder that Hayes considered this land his. A few days later, the official letters began to arrive. Not just for us, but for Sarah, for Mr. Henderson, for half a dozen other small landowners in the valley. They were thick, intimidating envelopes filled with legal jargon, citing obscure zoning violations, questioning long-established water rights, and challenging property boundaries. It's a classic SLAPP suit strategy, Dad said grimly as I stared at a cease and desist letter claiming our new fence encroached on an unused public easement. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. They drown you in legal fees and paperwork until you give up. We need a lawyer, I said, the pile of envelopes on the table feeling heavier than a rucksack full of ammunition. A good one, and we can't afford one. Dad was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. I might know someone. Old man Carter's boy, Ben. He was a few years behind you in school. Idealistic kid. Went to the city, became a lawyer, but I hear he never forgot where he came from. Ben Carter's office was not what I expected. It was a cramped, cluttered space above a bakery in the next town over, smelling of old books and fresh bread. Ben himself was the opposite of Marcus Hayes in every conceivable way. His suit was rumpled, his hair was a constant state of rebellion against gravity, and his desk was a mountain range of case files. But his eyes were sharp, intelligent, and burned with a fierce intensity. I laid out the story, the letters, the threat from Hayes. He listened patiently, steepling his fingers, his expression growing more serious with every word. Marcus Hayes, he said, the name leaving a bad taste in his mouth. I know him. He's Sterling's bulldog. He specializes in distressed acquisitions, finds people in vulnerable situations and squeezes them until they break. His tactics are legally questionable, but he has an army of corporate lawyers to back him up. So, we're screwed, I stated flatly. No, Ben said, leaning forward. You're not, you're fighting back. That's more than most people do. He tapped the press release Alina had written. This is good. This is your best weapon. Hayes operates in the shadows. He wants you to feel isolated, powerless. The more light you shine on him, the harder it is for him to operate. He agreed to take our case pro bono. My father loved this valley, he said simply. I'm not going to let guys like Hayes pave over it. His validation was a relief, but his warning was sobering. This won't be a quick fight, he told us. Their strategy is to bleed you dry, to wear you down. They'll file motion after motion. They will try to turn your neighbors against you, offering sweet deals to anyone who breaks ranks. You have to stay united, and you have to document everything. The fight shifted to a new front. By day, we were farmers, coaxing life back into the soil. By night, we were paralegals, poring over documents, taking photos, and chronicling every interaction with Sterling's representatives. The stress was immense. The initial adrenaline of defiance was wearing off, replaced by the grinding reality of a prolonged siege. Tempers frayed. People were tired. Their life savings were dwindling. One night, I found Dad on the porch, staring at the full moon. He looked older, more fragile than he had a month ago. Your mother, he said without looking at me, she went through a terrible frost in '98, came out of nowhere, wiped out nearly 80% of the buds. Everyone told her to give up, that the vineyard was done for. She just wouldn't. She replanted. She grafted. She worked until her hands bled. She told me the vines have a memory and that you have to give them a reason to remember the sun, not just the cold. He looked at me then, his eyes clear. You're like her, Mila. You don't know how to quit. Don't let this fight turn your heart to stone. Remember the sun. His words settled something in me. I was so focused on the fight, on the enemy, that I was forgetting what we were fighting for. The next afternoon, I was walking the rows with Miguel, the young worker who had been so loyal to Noah and now shadowed me with a quiet, fierce dedication. He was inspecting the damaged vines, his touch gentle, almost reverent. Sergeant Mila, he said, his voice hushed with excitement. Look, he pointed to a gnarled, heavily charred vine that we had all but written off. At its base, a single, vibrant green shoot was unfurling. But that wasn't what had caught his eye. It was the shape of the leaves. They were different, smaller, with a deeper, more pronounced lobe than our usual Cabernet or Chardonnay grapes. Mateo came over, his eyes widening. He knelt, touching a leaf as if it were a holy relic. Madre de Dios, he whispered. I thought they were all gone. What is it? I asked. It's charbono, Mateo said, a rare smile gracing his weathered face. Your great-grandfather planted a few rows of it 100 years ago. It's an old grape, a heritage grape, makes a beautiful, dark, inky wine. We thought the fire took them all. This one survived. Elena, hearing the commotion, came running. When she understood what they'd found, her strategic mind went into overdrive. Her eyes lit up. This is it, she breathed. This is more than just a story about a fire. This is about survival, legacy, a 100-year-old vine that refused to die. She looked at me, her grin wide and brilliant. We're not just selling wine from the ashes, Mila. We're selling a legacy. We're selling the survivor grape. Sterling Properties can't buy that. They can't manufacture it. It's ours. It's our story right here, growing out of the ground. I knelt and touched the small, perfect leaves of the charbono shoot. Dad was right. We had to give them a reason to remember the sun. This single, stubborn vine, pushing its way through the char and ruin, was our reason. It was a symbol of everything we were fighting for. It wasn't just a grape. It was hope. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The discovery of the charbono vine was like finding a live round in a dud ammo box. It changed the entire dynamic of our engagement. It gave us a weapon, something unique and powerful that Marcus Hayes couldn't replicate or buy. Elena seized on it with the fervor of a brilliant field commander identifying a tactical advantage. "This is our narrative," she declared, pacing the office, her hands animated. "We're not just victims fighting a corporation anymore. We are guardians of a legacy, the survivor grape. We'll call the wine Phoenix Vine. Think of the story. 100-year-old varietal, thought to be extinct on this land, reborn from the ashes of a fire set by corporate greed. It practically writes itself." Leo, Sarah's son, was immediately tasked with a redesign. The new website mock-ups he produced were stunning. Gone were the stark, documentary-style photos of the fire. In their place were artistic, close-up shots of the single green charbono shoot, its vibrant leaves contrasting with the charcoal black bark of the parent vine. The tagline was simple and powerful: "Some roots run too deep to burn." Our crowdfunding page was updated, our mission recontextualized. We weren't just asking for help to rebuild, we were inviting people to be part of the resurrection of a nearly extinct grape. We offered Phoenix Vine Futures, the opportunity to pre-purchase a bottle from the first, extremely limited harvest, years down the line. It was a gamble, selling a promise, but it was a promise wrapped in a story people wanted to believe in, and they did. The story of the survivor grape was potent. A well-known wine blogger, a man named Julian Croft with a reputation for championing small, artisanal producers, wrote a passionate piece about us. He called our struggle a modern-day fable of authenticity versus avarice. The article went viral. Suddenly, our campaign wasn't just receiving donations, it was receiving national attention. Orders for our existing wines, the ones that had survived in the cellar, spiked. Restaurants in San Francisco and Los Angeles were calling, wanting to put the vineyard that fought back on their wine lists. We were making money, not enough to clear the mountain of debt, but enough to pay our workers, enough to buy supplies, enough to give us breathing room. Most importantly, it gave us hope, a tangible result of our unified efforts. Marcus Hayes was not pleased. The positive press we were receiving was the worst thing that could have happened to his strategy of quiet suffocation. He couldn't attack a feel-good story about a plucky heritage grape, so he reverted to his old tactics. He attacked the people. The legal harassment intensified. Ben Carter was a warrior, but he was one man against an army. For every motion he filed, Sterling's lawyers filed 3 more. The paperwork was a constant, draining battle, but Hayes's next move was far more insidious. He decided to break our ranks from within. His target was the Garcia family. They owned a small plot of land adjacent to ours, mostly growing table grapes. Their losses in the fire had been significant, and unlike us, they didn't have a deep cellar of wine to sell. They had 2 kids nearing college age and were struggling badly. One afternoon, Hayes paid them a visit. I heard about it from Mateo, whose cousin was married to Mrs. Garcia. The news came as a low, worried murmur. "He offered them a lot of money, Mila, life-changing money, enough to send both kids to university and start over somewhere else. All they have to do is sell, and publicly break with our co-op." My blood ran cold. It was a surgical strike, aimed at our weakest point. If the Garcias broke, it would create a crack in our united front. Hayes would use it to paint us as a fractured, failing group, and other nervous landowners might follow suit. Our story of community resilience would crumble. I couldn't order the Garcias to stand firm. I couldn't guilt them into poverty for the sake of the group. That would make me no better than Hayes. I had to trust in the foundation we had built. I went to see them that evening. I didn't take an entourage. I went alone. I found Ramon Garcia on his porch, staring at the for sale sign that had been gathering dust in his barn. His wife, Isabella, stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her face a mask of worry. "Mila," Ramon said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He didn't look me in the eye. "I'm not here to tell you what to do, Ramon," I said softly, standing at the bottom of the porch steps. "I'm here to listen." He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with a painful conflict. "He offered us a way out, Mila. A clean slate. My daughter, Sophia, she wants to be a doctor. How can I tell her she can't go to her dream school because her father is too proud?" "You're not proud, Ramon." "You're a good father," I said. "And Hayes knows that. He's not offering you a future, he's using your love for your children as a weapon against all of us." I took a breath. "I can't offer you that much cash. I can't write a check that will pay for medical school. But I can offer you this, a share. Not just a share in the co-op, but a real ownership stake in the Phoenix Vine project. We'll graft cuttings from the charbono. We'll plant them on your land. Your plot has the best morning sun in the valley. Mateo says it would be perfect for them." I looked at both of them, my voice filled with every ounce of conviction I had. "Hayes is offering you fish. We're offering you a share in the whole damned fishing fleet. It's a risk. It's a long-term investment, but it will be yours. Your children won't just inherit a check from a man who tried to destroy our homes. They'll inherit a legacy, a story. They'll inherit this valley." I left them to talk. The decision had to be theirs. The next 24 hours were agonizing. The entire community held its breath. The next afternoon, we all saw Ramon Garcia walk out to his property line, right where Hayes's surveyors had planted their stakes. He wasn't carrying a for sale sign, he was carrying a shovel. With a powerful swing, he dug a hole in the soil, right next to the surveyor's stake. Then he pulled the stake out of the ground and tossed it aside. A cheer went up from our fields. It was a small, symbolic act, but it was a declaration. The Garcias were staying. They were choosing the Ark over the lifeboat. That night, our small victory was punctuated by a phone call from Ben Carter. He sounded tired but triumphant. "Good news, Mila," he said. "The State Attorney General's office is opening an investigation into Sterling Properties' business practices, specifically their tactics in disaster zones. Our campaign, the press, the letters from all you landowners, we made enough noise. Someone in power finally started listening." I closed my eyes, a profound sense of relief washing over me. "Is it enough to stop him?" "Not yet," Ben admitted. "But it's a start. We've drawn their fire. They're on the defensive now." I walked outside and looked at the vineyard, bathed in moonlight. The rows of sleeping vines, the charred hills in the distance, the single light on in the Garcia's house. We had held the line. We had protected our own. And in the heart of our vineyard, under a protective covering, the small, determined shoots of the survivor grape were gathering strength in the dark, ready for the sun. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The Attorney General's investigation acted like a flare in the night, illuminating our fight but also making us a clearer target. For a few weeks, an uneasy calm settled over the valley. The threatening legal letters stopped. The black sedan was no longer seen cruising the local roads. It felt like a ceasefire, but I knew it was just the quiet before a storm. Marcus Hayes wasn't the type to retreat. He was the type to regroup and find a new line of attack. My training had taught me that the most dangerous enemy is the one who goes silent. We used the reprieve to focus all our energy on the Phoenix Vine project. The community, buoyed by our recent victories, worked with a renewed sense of purpose. Mateo, with the delicate precision of a surgeon, began the painstaking process of taking cuttings from the original Charbono mother vine. It was a sacred, hopeful act. He treated each small twig as if it were a priceless gem. We prepared a special section of the Garcia's land, a makeshift nursery where these precious cuttings would be grafted onto robust rootstock, nurtured until they were strong enough to be planted in the main vineyard. Every member of the co-op had a role. Mr. Henderson designed a clever irrigation system from salvaged parts. Sarah and her family helped prepare the soil. The Garcia children, home for the weekend, worked alongside us, their laughter a welcome sound against the hum of work. It was during this period of intense, hopeful labor that a letter arrived for me, not in a crisp corporate envelope, but in a flimsy one with a prison postmark. My brother's handwriting was barely recognizable, a shaky, spidery scrawl. I opened it with a knot in my stomach, a mixture of anger and a residual, unwelcome flicker of familial duty. "Mila, I don't know if you'll even read this. I don't blame you if you throw it in the fire. I know sorry isn't enough for what I did. It will never be enough. I sit in here every day and see the flames. I see Dad's face. But that's not why I'm writing. I heard from my lawyer that you're fighting back against Sterling, that you're winning. I'm glad, but I need to warn you. The man I dealt with, Marcus Hayes, he's not just a businessman, he's a snake. I was deep in debt to some very bad people, and he was the one who helped me. He bought my debt, owned me. He was the one who suggested the controlled burn. He told me it was a common tactic to lower property values before a buyout. He said it would be small, contained. He lied. Be careful, Mila. He doesn't play by any rules. If he can't get what he wants one way, he'll find another. A darker way. He won't let a little vineyard and a good story stand in his way. Watch your back. Noah, I read the letter 3 times, the paper trembling in my hands. It wasn't an apology, not really. It was a confession and a warning. Noah, in his weakness, had gotten tangled with something far worse than a greedy developer. He had made a deal with the devil, and now he was warning me about the devil's methods. The letter didn't absolve him, but it clarified the nature of our enemy. Hayes wasn't just trying to outmaneuver us legally, he was capable of criminal acts. The fire hadn't just been Noah's desperate idea, it had been whispered in his ear. My sense of unease sharpened into genuine alarm. I showed the letter to Dad, to Ben Carter, and to the co-op's core team. A new, more somber mood settled over our work. We were no longer just farmers and neighbors, we were soldiers defending a position. "This changes things," Ben said, his expression grim. "This confirms he has a pattern of criminal conspiracy. I can use this, but it also means we need to be incredibly careful. He's been publicly shamed and legally challenged. A man like that is at his most dangerous when he feels cornered." We implemented new security measures. We installed motion-activated cameras at the entrances to the vineyard. We organized a rotating night watch, with pairs of volunteers patrolling the perimeter. It felt absurd, standing guard over grapevines, but Noah's letter had made the threat feel chillingly real. Young Miguel, fiercely loyal, took his new role as a sentry with the utmost seriousness, often taking extra shifts, his German shepherd, Duke, at his side. For a week, nothing happened. The cameras showed only wandering deer and the occasional coyote. The patrols were quiet and cold. We started to feel a bit foolish, a bit paranoid. Then, one morning, I came out to the nursery at dawn. Miguel was just finishing his shift, stamping his feet against the cold. "All quiet, Sergeant," he reported, giving me a tired smile. But as I walked toward the greenhouse where we kept the most delicate new grafts, a strange chemical smell hit the back of my throat. It was sharp, like bleach mixed with something oily. A cold dread washed over me. I broke into a run. The scene inside the small greenhouse was one of quiet, vicious desecration. Dozens of our carefully prepared grafts, the tiny charbono shoots just beginning to bond with their new rootstock, were snapped. There the stems were severed with a clean, sharp cut, not torn. The herbicide, or whatever it was, had been sprayed methodically, drenching the delicate union where new life was supposed to take hold. It was a targeted assassination of hope. Miguel came up behind me, and a choked, guttural sound escaped his throat. No, I checked. I was here all night." His face, usually so full of youthful earnestness, crumpled with guilt and horror. "I failed, Sergeant, I failed you." I put a hand on his shoulder, my own anger a cold, hard stone in my gut. "This is not your fault, Miguel. This is not a failure of watchfulness. This is a deliberate, professional attack. They knew our routines. They knew when to strike. They knew what to strike." Mateo arrived next, drawn by our silence. He stopped at the entrance to the greenhouse, and for a moment I thought the old man would collapse. The color drained from his face. He walked slowly to the nearest ruined graft, touching a withered leaf with a trembling finger. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I could see the heartbreak in his eyes, a deep personal wound. This wasn't just sabotage, it was sacrilege. The rest of the community gathered, their morning cheer turning to stunned silence, then to a low, angry murmur. The desecration of the nursery was an attack on all of them, on the very symbol of their defiance. "He didn't even try to hide it," Sarah said, her voice shaking with rage as she pointed to a single, distinct boot print in the soft soil near the back wall, a print the saboteur had clearly missed in the dark. It was a military-style tread, deep and defined. We called the sheriff. A deputy came out, a young man who looked bored and unimpressed. He took a cursory look, wrote a few notes on a pad. "Vandalism," he concluded with a shrug. "Happens, probably some kids, you should lock your greenhouse." "This wasn't kids," I said, my voice tight, pointing to the boot print and the chemical residue. "This was calculated. This is connected to an ongoing corporate harassment campaign." The deputy sighed. "Look, Ms. Moore, unless you have a photo of the guy doing it, there's not much we can do. We'll file a report." He handed me a slip of paper and drove off, leaving us standing in the wreckage of our hopes, the official response as hollow and useless as a broken promise. That was Hayes's genius. It was an act of terror designed to be untraceable, to leave us feeling powerless and unprotected. And for a moment, it worked. The despair in the air was palpable. The energy and optimism of the past few weeks had evaporated, replaced by the bitter taste of defeat. That afternoon, I called a meeting in the barn. Morale was at an all-time low. People were scared, whispering amongst themselves. Maybe Hayes was right. Maybe this was a fight we couldn't win. I let the silence hang for a moment before I spoke. I didn't shout. I didn't try to whip them into a frenzy. I spoke from the cold, hard center of my own resolve. "He wanted this," I began, my voice quiet but carrying through the cavernous space. "He wanted this feeling, this fear, this doubt. He attacked our nursery because he can't attack our spirit, so he tried to kill the symbol of it instead." I held up one of the severed cuttings, its tiny leaves already brown and withered. "This is what he wants us to see, a broken branch, a dead end. He wants us to believe that our hope is this fragile, but he's wrong." I looked over at Mateo, who was staring at the floor, his shoulders slumped. "Mateo," I said, my voice firm, The mother vine, the original Charbono, did he get to it? Matteo looked up, confusion in his eyes. No, it is in the old vineyard, protected by the hills. Exactly, I said, my voice rising. He didn't destroy the root, he only pruned the branches. The source is still alive, the legacy is still there. He can't poison the soil that has fed this vine for 100 years. He can't poison our history. I walked to the center of the barn. He thinks this will make us quit, will it? A few heads shook uncertainly. He thinks this will scare us into selling, will it? The no was a little louder this time, a collective murmur of defiance. This is not a setback, I declared, my voice ringing with the authority of a commander rallying her troops under fire. This is intelligence. This tells us our strategy is working. He is so scared of the story of a single, surviving grape that he had to sneak in here in the dead of night, like a coward, to kill it. We have him on the defensive, and he's lashing out. We will take more cuttings, we will double our efforts. We will build a better greenhouse, a stronger one, we will protect our legacy. And we will make him pay for this, not in his way, in ours. Elena, who had been silently fuming in the corner, stepped forward, her eyes blazing. She's right, he gave us a gift. He gave us a villain for our story. She pulled out her phone. I'm calling Julian Croft, the blogger. I'm sending him pictures of this, of the boot print. Of the deputy's useless report. The headline will be, Corporate Giant Tries to Murder a Grape. We're not going to hide this. We're going to put a spotlight on it so bright it burns him. A new energy sparked in the room. The fear was being burned away by anger, and the anger was being forged into resolve. Miguel, his guilt now replaced with a fierce determination, squared his shoulders. I'll stand guard at the mother vine myself every night, he vowed. Ramon Garcia clapped him on the shoulder. Not alone, you won't, we'll all take shifts. That evening, as the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, we were not a community in mourning. We were an army solidifying its defenses and planning its counterattack. I stood with Dad on the porch, watching the volunteers stringing up new lights around the old vineyard, turning it into a small, defiant fortress of light in the encroaching darkness. He underestimated you, Mila, Dad said, a hint of a smile on his face for the first time all day. He underestimated this whole valley. It's what happens when you think everything has a price tag, I replied, watching the lights flicker on. You forget what people will fight for when something is priceless. Elena's counteroffensive was swift and devastatingly effective. She didn't just send the photos to Julian Croft. She sent them to every major news outlet in California, along with a concise, damning timeline of Sterling Properties' harassment campaign, a copy of Noah's warning letter, and a high-resolution image of the single, military-style boot print. The story had everything: a struggling family, a resilient community, a rare heritage grape, and a villainous corporation. It was David versus a Goliath who fought dirty. The media explosion was unlike anything our quiet valley had ever seen. Within 48 hours, our dusty vineyard road was lined with news vans, their satellite dishes pointed at the sky like metallic sunflowers. Reporters with microphones and perfectly coiffed hair trampled the edges of our fields, all vying for an interview. At first, it was overwhelming, a disorienting circus. But Elena, born for this moment, took control. She became our press secretary, our public face, expertly managing the narrative. She arranged interviews not just with me, but with Ramon Garcia, who spoke eloquently about choosing community over a corporate buyout. She had them talk to Mr. Henderson, who, standing before the ruins of his home, became a symbol of quiet dignity and defiance. We weren't just a story about grapes anymore, we were the story of a community under siege. Sterling Properties was forced to respond. Their PR firm issued a cold, sterile statement vehemently denying any involvement in what they called an unfortunate act of local vandalism. They expressed deep sympathy for our troubles while simultaneously suggesting our entire campaign was a cynical and manipulative fundraising ploy. Marcus Hayes appeared on a business news channel, his expression a mask of concerned sincerity. He called our accusations slanderous and desperate, and hinted that his company was exploring legal action for defamation. It was a slick corporate defense, but it was too late. The image of the murdered grapevines was too powerful, the story too compelling. The public had chosen a side. Our crowdfunding campaign surged, donations pouring in from all over the country. A group of renowned chefs from San Francisco started a Save the Valley campaign, featuring our wines in their restaurants and donating a portion of the proceeds. We were no longer financially vulnerable, we were a cause célèbre. The public pressure had a tangible effect on the official investigation. I received a call from Ben Carter, his voice crackling with excitement. Mila, the AG's office is escalating. They're sending one of their top investigators, a woman named Maria Diaz. She's sharp, she's tenacious, and she specializes in corporate fraud and intimidation. She wants to speak with you tomorrow. Investigator Diaz was nothing like the bored local deputy. She was a compact woman with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She walked the perimeter of the greenhouse, studied the boot print, and listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. She took Noah's letter, handling it carefully in a plastic sleeve. "Mr. Hayes has a history," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "He's good at insulating himself. He uses contractors, third parties, makes it hard to trace anything back to him directly." She looked at the boot print. "But people get sloppy, especially when they think they're dealing with a bunch of simple farmers." She gave me her card. "You've done a good job making noise, Sergeant Moore. Now let's see if we can turn that noise into evidence. Call me if anything else happens." Anything at all. Her visit was a validation. For the first time, it felt like the system was working for us, not against us. But her words about Hayes using contractors stuck with me. The boot print was a loose thread. If we could pull on it, maybe the whole thing would unravel. My military career had connected me with a wide range of specialists. I scrolled through my phone and found the number I was looking for. Jake Spector Riley. He'd been an Army intelligence analyst, a wizard at finding needles in digital haystacks. Now he ran a private security and investigations firm. "Mila," his voice boomed over the phone. "Heard you were making some noise out there in wine country, causing trouble for the suits. Good on you." I got straight to the point, sending him a high-resolution photo of the boot print. "Jake, I need to know who wears this boot. It's a specific tread. Not standard issue, but tactical. The kind a contractor or a PI might use." "Leave it with me," he said. "Give me a day." While Jake worked his magic, we returned to ours. With the new funds, we built a larger, more secure greenhouse. Mateo, his spirit rekindled, began the process of taking new cuttings from the mother vine. There was a quiet determination to our work, the focused energy of a team that had weathered an attack and come out stronger. We had lost time, but we had gained an ironclad resolve. The next evening, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. It contained a single file. I opened it. It was a dossier. The boot tread belonged to a brand favored by private military contractors and high-end security firms. And Jake had cross-referenced that with a list of known associates of Sterling Properties, pulling from public records, surveillance databases, and a few less-than-official sources. The file contained a name, Evan Rourke, ex-Special Forces turned corporate security consultant. The dossier included a photo. A man with a square jaw, a shaved head, and cold, empty eyes. It also included a list of his recent clients. Sterling Properties was at the top. And his last known location? A motel just 20 miles from our valley, checked in 3 days before the nursery was destroyed. I stared at the photo, my heart pounding. This was him. This was the ghost who had walked through our vineyard in the dark. This was the man who had tried to kill our hope. He wasn't some faceless corporate entity. He had a name and a face. I immediately forwarded the file to Investigator Diaz. Her reply was instantaneous. "Don't approach him. Don't do anything. We've got him. Thank you, Sergeant. We had him." The link. The weapon Hayes had used. We had pulled on the thread, and a vital piece of the enemy's machine had just come loose. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. We weren't just defending anymore. We were hunting. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The news of Evan Rourke's arrest was not a loud explosion, but a quiet, satisfying click, the sound of a critical tumbler falling into place. Investigator Diaz called me personally. "We picked him up this morning," she said, her voice all business. "He's not talking, but his alibi for the night of the sabotage is full of holes, and we found boots matching the print in his motel room. This is the link we needed, Sergeant, the direct connection between Hayes's payroll and a criminal act on your property." A wave of profound relief washed over me. It was a tangible victory, a vindication of our fight. I shared the news with the community, and for the first time in months, the air was filled with a sense of celebration. That night, we lit a bonfire, not a fire of fear, but one of triumph. We shared bottles of our surviving wine, told stories, and watched the flames dance against the night sky. We had faced the monster in the dark and dragged him into the light. In the weeks that followed, it felt as though we had finally turned a corner. With Rourke in custody and the Attorney General's investigation now focused like a laser on Sterling Properties, the harassment ceased completely. The legal battles subsided as Ben Carter went on the offensive, filing a massive civil suit against Sterling for damages and intimidation. The media attention slowly faded, leaving us in a peaceful, productive quiet. Our focus shifted entirely to the lifeblood of the vineyard, the coming harvest. The vines, having survived the fire and the drought, were heavy with fruit. The grapes were small but intensely flavored, a product of their struggle. Matteo predicted it would be one of the best vintages in years. The new Charbono grafts in the secure greenhouse were thriving, a testament to our resilience. Our finances were stable, thanks to the outpouring of support. The future of the Moore family vineyard and of the entire co-op finally felt secure. It was Matteo who noticed it first. He was walking the rows of Chardonnay, his gnarled hands gently turning a cluster of grapes toward the sun. I saw him stop, his body going unnaturally still. He brought a leaf to his nose, then another. A deep frown creased his weathered face. "What is it, Matteo?" I called out, walking over. "Something is wrong," he said, his voice a low rumble of concern. "The leaves, they feel brittle, and they smell of sickness." I took the leaf he offered. It looked healthy enough, a vibrant green, but it felt strangely dry, and there was a faint, almost imperceptible chemical odor to it, an echo of the smell from the sabotaged nursery. Over the next few days, we watched with a growing sense of dread as the strange sickness spread. It was subtle. The vines didn't die, they just seemed to weaken. The leaves on the lower branches began to yellow and curl at the edges. The grapes, which had been swelling perfectly, seemed to stop, their skins looking dull and lifeless. We brought in an agricultural specialist from the university. He ran tests on the soil and the leaves. The results were baffling. "There's no sign of any known fungus, no blight, no insect infestation," he reported, scratching his head. "It's as if the vines are suffering from a nutrient deficiency, but your soil is perfectly balanced. I've never seen anything quite like it." A cold, creeping fear began to take root in my heart. This felt familiar. It was an attack that was designed to look like something else, something natural. It was insidious, untraceable. It was Hayes's style. But how? He was under investigation. His known operative was in jail. He wouldn't be so foolish as to try something now. The answer came to me in the middle of the night. The vines weren't getting sick from the soil. They were getting sick from what fed them. The next morning, I gathered Matteo and Ramon Garcia. "We're going to the reservoir," I said, my voice grim. Our main water source was a large, spring-fed reservoir nestled in the hills at the far end of our property. It was remote, accessible only by a narrow, rutted track. We drove up in my truck, the silence heavy with unspoken fear. The reservoir looked peaceful, its surface placid under the morning sun. But as we got closer, I saw the signs. The cattails and reeds that normally grew in thick clusters along the water's edge were brown and withered. There were no dragonflies skimming the surface, no frogs croaking in the shallows. The water, which should have been teeming with life, was unnaturally still and quiet. Matteo knelt at the edge, scooping a handful of water. He let it run through his fingers, then brought his hand to his nose. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "Poison," he whispered, the word like a curse. "It is faint. But it is here." I walked the perimeter. On the far side, hidden behind a thicket of dead manzanita bushes, I found it. A discarded, unlabeled 5-gallon plastic container wedged between two rocks. It was empty, but a few drops of a clear, slightly viscous liquid still clung to the bottom. It smelled faintly of industrial chemicals. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a recent attack. This was done weeks, maybe months ago, before Rourke was caught, before the investigation began. It was a release bomb. Hayes, or one of his operatives, had dumped a slow-acting, broad-spectrum herbicide or chemical defoliant into our water supply. Something that wouldn't kill the vines outright, but would slowly poison them from the inside, making the fruit unviable, unsellable. He had planned this as a failsafe. If all else failed, he would destroy the harvest itself, bankrupting us from within, leaving us with nothing but acres of poisoned fruit. We stood there, looking at the silent, toxic water, and I felt a rage colder and deeper than anything I had felt before. This was a different kind of evil. The fire had been an attack on our property. The sabotage in the nursery had been an attack on our future. This was an attack on the land itself. A desecration of the very source of our life. He had turned our own water against us. "We can't harvest," Ramon said, his voice hollow. "The grapes, they will be full of this poison. We would be selling poison." "Our entire season's work," Matteo said, his voice cracking with emotion. Everything, lost. The financial implications were catastrophic. We had pre-sold cases based on this harvest. The co-op had taken out loans for new equipment. We had used the crowdfunding money to rebuild, assuming this harvest would be our salvation. Without it, we would be ruined, plunged into a debt far deeper than what Noah had created. This time, there would be no feel-good story to save us, just a quiet, bitter end. Hayes had finally found a way to win. He had planted a seed of destruction that had blossomed in silence, and now we were left to reap the toxic harvest. I looked at the faces of the two men beside me, etched with despair. I looked at the vineyard below, our home, our legacy, secretly dying. The fight wasn't over. It had just entered its most deadly, desperate stage. "He made a mistake," I said, my voice barely a whisper but vibrating with a new, unshakable resolve. Mateo and Ramon looked at me, confused. "He thinks this is the end," I continued, turning to face them, my eyes hard as flint. "He thinks he can poison our land and walk away. But this isn't just evidence of corporate harassment anymore. This is a criminal environmental attack. This is an act of biological warfare on our community." I took a water sample from the reservoir, sealing it tightly. The fight isn't about saving the harvest anymore. It's about making sure Marcus Hayes never sees the outside of a prison cell. He wanted to scorch the earth. Fine, we'll show him what it's like to get burned. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The drive back down from the reservoir was the longest journey of my life. The silence in the truck was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Every familiar landmark, the old oak tree, the turnoff to Sarah's place, the first glimpse of our own rooftops, seemed alien, like scenery from a life that was no longer ours. We were returning from a battlefield with news of a decisive, catastrophic defeat. We gathered the core group in the office: Dad, Elena, Sarah, and Ben Carter, whom I'd called on the way down. I placed the sealed container of water on the desk. It sat there, innocuous and deadly, a vial of poison in the heart of our home. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid out the facts with the blunt, dispassionate clarity of a field medic delivering a fatal diagnosis. "The reservoir is contaminated," I began, my voice steady, betraying none of the cold fury churning inside me. "A slow-acting chemical agent. The agriculturalists report the weakening vines, the dead wildlife. It all points to a deliberate, long-term poisoning of our water supply. The harvest is a total loss. The grapes are toxic. We can't sell them, we can't even process them." The silence that followed was absolute. Dad seemed to shrink into his chair, one hand going unconsciously to his chest. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth. Elena, for the first time since I'd known her, looked utterly lost, her strategic mind momentarily blank in the face of a problem with no apparent solution. It was Ben Carter who broke the silence, his lawyer's mind cutting through the shock. He stared at the water sample. This is beyond anything I imagined. This isn't just a civil case for damages anymore. This is a federal crime. Contaminating a water source, interstate commerce violations if you'd sold the wine, this could fall under the RICO Act. This is organized crime. "It's a scorched earth tactic," I said grimly. "A final screw you from Hayes. He planted this bomb months ago, knowing that even if we beat him on every other front, he would still win by destroying the very thing we were fighting for." Elena finally found her voice, a raw, angry whisper. "So that's it, all that work. The crowdfunding, the media, the community, all for nothing. We're ruined." The despair in her voice was a dangerous contagion. I had to cut it off before it spread. "No," I said, my voice sharp, commanding. I stood up and began to pace, the way I did when I was thinking through a complex combat scenario. "We are not ruined, we are hurt. We have sustained a critical blow, but the objective has changed." They all looked at me, their faces a mixture of confusion and desperate hope. "For months, our objective has been to save the vineyard, to bring in the harvest. That objective is no longer viable. That battle is lost," I said, letting the harsh reality of the words sink in. "Our new objective is to ensure that Marcus Hayes and every single person at Sterling Properties involved in this conspiracy spends the rest of their lives in a courtroom or a prison cell. Our focus is no longer on survival. It is on retribution." That afternoon, I called a full community meeting in the barn. The news had already started to trickle out, and the mood was funereal. The joy of our recent victories was a bitter memory. I stood before them, the faces of my friends and neighbors pale with shock and fear, and I told them the unvarnished truth. I told them their hard work, their sweat, their faith, it would not result in a harvest this year. I watched their shoulders slump, saw tears well up in Isabella Garcia's eyes. I let them feel the weight of the loss. Then I laid out the new mission. Marcus Hayes thought he was destroying a crop, I said, my voice echoing in the silent barn. But he made a critical error. He didn't understand what he was really attacking. He wasn't attacking our business. He was attacking our homes. He was attacking our children's future. He was attacking the land our ancestors are buried in. I held up the sealed water sample. He thought this was his victory, but this is his confession. This is the evidence that will burn his empire to the ground. Investigator Diaz is on her way. The full weight of the state and federal government is about to come down on Sterling Properties. But they need us, they need our story, they need our unified voice. I looked out at the sea of devastated faces. I can't offer you a share of this year's harvest. There is nothing to share. What I can offer you is a share in justice. I am asking you to stand with me, not for a paycheck, but for a principle. We will become the star witnesses in the case that brings them down. We will turn this poisoned land into a crime scene that no one can ignore. We will give up this year's profits to guarantee that no other community, no other family, ever has to suffer at the hands of these people again. There was no cheer. There was something more profound, a slow, grim hardening of expressions. Ramon Garcia, his face like a thundercloud, stood up. He poisoned our land. Our children drank that water. There is no forgiveness for that. I am with you, Mila, to the end. One by one, others stood. A silent, solemn pledge. The despair was being replaced by a cold, unifying rage. When Investigator Diaz arrived, she wasn't met by a group of defeated farmers. She was met by a small, disciplined army. We gave her the water sample. We gave her our sworn testimonies. We showed her the dying vines. She moved with a quiet, intense focus, her team in tow, sealing off the reservoir, collecting soil samples, documenting everything. The vineyard was officially a crime scene. That evening, we began the heartbreaking task that had to be done. We couldn't let the poisoned grapes simply rot. They had to be destroyed, documented as evidence of loss. We fired up the tractors and drove them through the rows, not with harvesting bins, but with plows. The sound of the engines was a mournful dirge. The sight of the beautiful, toxic fruit being churned back into the earth was one of the most painful things I had ever witnessed. Each crushed grape was a symbol of a stolen dream. But with every row we destroyed, we were also erasing Hayes's victory. We were cleansing the land, preparing it for a new fight. As I watched the plows work under the harsh glare of portable floodlights, Dad came and stood beside me. "This is a hard thing, Mila," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the only thing to do, Dad," I replied, my eyes fixed on the destruction. "It's a tactical burn. We're destroying our own position so the enemy can't use it." We were no longer farmers trying to save a harvest. We were a prosecution team building an ironclad case. We were turning our poisoned vineyard into the weapon that would win the war. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The days following the great plowing were the quietest I had ever known the vineyard to be. The silence was heavier than the smoke had been. There was no hum of machinery, no chatter of workers in the rows, no life. There was only the sight of the bare, brown earth, a landscape of our own making, a self-inflicted wound carved out of the land to save the body. We had destroyed our own harvest, and in doing so, we had destroyed our income for the foreseeable future. The adrenaline of the decision had worn off, leaving behind a harsh, sober reality. The crowdfunding money, which had once felt like a war chest, now seemed like a pittance against the mountain of debt and the daily cost of living for the dozens of families that made up our co-op. The grim mathematics of survival began to assert themselves. Sarah quietly admitted she'd had to pull money from her children's college fund just to make payroll for her own small crew. I saw Mr. Henderson using salvaged wood to board up a broken window in his temporary trailer, a repair he couldn't afford to have done professionally. Elena, our brilliant strategist, sat in the office staring at a whiteboard that was, for the first time, completely blank. There was no new narrative to spin, no product to market. There was only the waiting. Our unity was being tested not by a visible enemy, but by the slow, grinding pressure of poverty. Yet, no one broke. No one complained. There was a shared understanding that we were in a new kind of trench, hunkered down, conserving our resources, waiting for the signal to attack. We organized community potlucks, sharing what little we had. We bartered services, an engine repair for a basket of eggs, childcare for help mending a roof. We were stripped down to the essentials of community, and the bond, forged in fire, was holding. Investigator Diaz and her team were methodical, their work a slow, painstaking process. The water and soil samples were sent to a state forensics lab. The remnants of the plastic container were analyzed. It was a waiting game, a battle of attrition against a legal system that moves at a glacial pace. The lab confirmed the chemical compound, Diaz told me over the phone 1 week later. Her voice was flat, professional. It's a potent, custom-blend agricultural defoliant. Not illegal, but highly regulated. It's not something you can just buy at a hardware store. We're running a check on all licensed distributors and purchasers in the state, but the list is long. Hayes would have covered his tracks, used a third party, a shell company. So we wait, I said. It wasn't a question. For now, we wait for a lead, she confirmed. But tell your people to hang on, Sergeant. The AG's office is taking this very, very seriously. We're building a fortress of a case. But I wasn't good at waiting. In the Army, waiting meant you were vulnerable. It meant the enemy was maneuvering. I needed my own intelligence. I called Jake Riley. Spectre, I said, I have a new mission for you. I sent him the chemical compound name Diaz had given me. I need to know who buys this stuff, not the legal buyers on the state's list, the ones who don't want to be found, the ones who pay cash and don't ask for a receipt. I need the shell companies. That's a deep dive, Mila, he said, a low whistle in his voice. You're asking me to poke around in some very dark corners of the chemical supply industry. It's not cheap. Our entire community is on the line, I replied. Find it, Jake, whatever it costs. While Jake dug into the digital underworld, Ben Carter was busy fighting a different kind of war. He was in court, holding off the creditors that had started to circle our debt-ridden co-op like sharks scenting blood. He filed motion after motion, using the ongoing criminal investigation as a shield, arguing that any foreclosure proceedings would be interfering with a federal crime scene. He was buying us time, one billable hour at a time, still working pro bono. Meanwhile, Marcus Hayes was a ghost. He had disappeared from the public eye. His lawyers issued no-comment statements. It was clear their strategy was to let us wither on the vine, to let our financial ruin become an old news story. They thought they had delivered the killing blow and were simply waiting for us to bleed out. A report from one of Ben's contacts confirmed it. Hayes had been seen at an exclusive golf resort in Palm Springs, celebrating a new land deal in Arizona. He thought he had won. He thought he had buried us under our own poisoned soil. 2 weeks later, Jake called. There was no greeting. Got it, he said. Agro Solutions, LLC. A paper-thin shell corp registered to a P.O. box in Bakersfield. It exists for one purpose, to buy and resell industrial chemicals with no questions asked. 6 weeks ago, they made a single, massive purchase of your custom blend defoliant, paid in cash. My knuckles were white as I gripped the phone. Can you link it to Sterling? Directly? No, Hayes is too smart for that, Jake said. But the holding company that owns the P.O. box, it's managed by a law firm. And one of the junior partners at that firm used to work in the legal department at Sterling Properties. It's a thin connection, but it's not a coincidence. This is your shell. He sent me the file. The address for Agro Solutions wasn't a real office. It was a rundown warehouse in an industrial park on the forgotten edge of Fresno. I stared at the address on my screen, a cold, clear purpose crystallizing in my mind. This was it, the loose thread, the weak point in the enemy's defenses. I called Investigator Diaz. I have your shell company, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a rifle scope on a windless day. I gave her the name and the address. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then, how did you get this information, Sergeant? I have my resources, I said. You wanted a lead investigator? I'm giving you a direct target. The people who bought the poison that was dumped in my water are at that warehouse. Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. When she spoke again, her voice had a new edge to it, the sound of a hunter who has just caught the scent of her prey. Stay put, Sergeant, she said. Don't go anywhere near that place. My team and I will handle it from here. I hung up the phone and walked out onto the porch. I looked out at the barren, plowed-under fields. They didn't look like a wound anymore. They looked like a promise of a reckoning. The waiting was over. The hunt had begun. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. Knowing the address of the warehouse and being told to stay put were two entirely different things. My training, my instincts, my entire being screamed against the idea of sitting idle while the decisive action was taking place miles away. This wasn't just a legal case anymore, it was a personal mission. I needed to see it. I needed to be there. I made the drive to Fresno alone, my truck eating up the highway miles that separated the green hills of my home from the flat, sun-baked sprawl of the Central Valley. I didn't have a plan. I wasn't going to storm the warehouse. I knew better than to interfere with an official investigation. But I had to be the eyes on the ground. I had to bear witness. The industrial park was a desolate grid of corrugated metal buildings and cracked asphalt, shimmering in the heat. It was a place for things that were meant to be forgotten. I found the warehouse, Agro Solutions LLC, a featureless, rust-stained box with no windows. I parked a quarter-mile away, in the shadow of a long-abandoned cannery, my position giving me a clear line of sight. And I waited. For hours, nothing happened. The sun beat down on my truck. The silence was broken only by the distant rumble of the highway. Then, just as dusk began to bleed purple into the orange sky, they arrived. Not with sirens and flashing lights, but in a quiet, coordinated sweep. A fleet of unmarked black sedans and a single, ominous-looking panel van. Investigator Diaz's team. They moved with a fluid, no-nonsense efficiency that I recognized and respected. They established a perimeter, silent figures taking up positions at every corner of the building. Then, Diaz's voice, amplified by a bullhorn, cut through the twilight stillness. "State investigators, we have a warrant to search these premises." "Open the door." There was no response. After a tense minute, a heavily armored team moved in, using a battering ram on a side door. It gave way with a screech of protesting metal, and the team disappeared inside. The next few hours were a blur of controlled, methodical activity. Lights flickered on inside the warehouse. Figures moved back and forth. Flatbed trucks arrived, and investigators in full hazmat suits began loading pallets of unlabeled barrels and containers. They were dismantling a ghost operation, piece by piece. Around midnight, Diaz herself emerged. She was talking on her phone, her face illuminated by the screen. Even from a distance, I could see the grim satisfaction in her expression. A few minutes later, 2 of her agents escorted a man out of the warehouse. He was a weasel-faced man in a cheap suit, his hands cuffed behind his back. The manager, the middleman, the first domino. I knew I had what I needed. I had seen the connection made real. I turned my truck around and drove home, a quiet, cold sense of victory settling over me. The raid on the warehouse was the key that unlocked everything. The manager, facing a slew of federal charges, began to talk. He gave them the name of the man who had paid him in cash, a man he knew only as Mr. Smith. But he had a detailed physical description. And more importantly, he had a record of the untraceable burner phone Mr. Smith had used to arrange the purchase. The phone's last ping, Diaz told me a day later, was from a cell tower in Palm Springs, on the same day and within 100 yards of the golf resort where Marcus Hayes was staying. It was the final link. The circumstantial chain was now a set of iron shackles. The next morning, the news broke. Sterling Properties raided BY State and Federal AG&TS. The headlines were explosive. The footage led every news broadcast. Teams of agents carrying boxes of evidence out of Sterling's gleaming corporate headquarters in Los Angeles. The camera zoomed in on the face of Marcus Hayes as he was escorted out of the building by his lawyers, his face a perfect mask of arrogant indignation. But his eyes held a flicker of panic. For the first time, he looked like a man who was truly afraid. The story of our small vineyard was no longer a local human interest piece. It was the centerpiece of a massive corporate scandal. The narrative we had so carefully crafted, the survivor grape, the community that fought back, was now the prosecution's Exhibit A. Ben Carter called, his voice electric with the thrill of the fight. "Mila, this is it. The civil case is on hold. The AG is bringing a massive criminal indictment against Sterling, Hayes, and half their board of directors. Conspiracy, environmental crimes, racketeering, they're throwing the book at them. And you, your family, your entire community, you are the star witnesses." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of legal preparations. We met with prosecutors, gave depositions, and walked them through every piece of evidence, every threat, every act of intimidation. Our barn, once a place of celebration and despair, became a makeshift legal office where we prepared for the trial that would define all our futures. It was during this time that I received a formal, official-looking letter from the Department of the Army. My heart sank. With all the chaos, I had almost forgotten. My compassionate leave was finite. My time as a civilian was coming to an end. The letter was my new orders. I was being reassigned. Fort Sam Houston in Texas. Instructor at the Combat Medic Training School. It was a good posting, a promotion even. A year ago, I would have been thrilled. Now, it felt like an eviction notice. I sat on the porch with Dad that evening, the letter in my hand. The vineyard, though still barren, was peaceful. The co-op was buzzing with a new, focused energy, preparing for the trial. I had led them to this point, brought them to the edge of victory, but I wouldn't be able to see them through to the end. "I have to go back, Dad," I said quietly, showing him the letter. "My duty is to the army." He read the orders, his expression unreadable. He folded the paper carefully and handed it back to me. "Your duty," he said, his voice soft but firm, "is to your word, to your mission. You think this fight is over? This trial will be a war, Mila. Those lawyers will try to tear our community apart on the stand. They will try to discredit every one of us. They will try to break our spirit. This community, they follow you. You're their commander. You can't leave your post in the middle of a battle." "It's not my choice, Dad," I said, the words tasting like ash. "An order is an order." "Is it?" he asked, looking me straight in the eye. "Or is the uniform a shield you've been hiding behind? A way to avoid putting down roots? A way to avoid making a permanent choice? You found your mission, Mila. It's right here. This land, these people, don't run from it now." His words hit me harder than any physical blow. He was right. For 10 years, the army had been my identity, my purpose. It had been my honorable escape from the complications of home, but home had found me. The fight had found me. I was Sergeant Mila Moore, but I was also just Mila. And for the first time, I wasn't sure where one ended and the other began. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the barren fields under a canopy of stars, wrestling with the impossible choice between two duties, two lives, my duty to my country and my duty to my home. By the time the sun rose, casting its first golden light on the hills, I had made my decision. I picked up my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my commanding officer. The second was to Ben Carter. "Ben," I said, my voice clear and curt, "we need to talk about the future. Not just of the trial, but of the vineyard. It's time to start planning our first real harvest. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat." My decision landed like a stone in a quiet pond, sending ripples through every part of my life. The phone call with my commanding officer was the hardest conversation I'd ever had. He was a good man, a colonel who had seen me through 2 deployments. He didn't understand. "Sergeant Moore," he said, his voice a mixture of sternness and genuine confusion. "You're throwing away a career. An honorable discharge I can understand. But a formal resignation? You're walking away from your pension, your benefits, everything you've worked for." "I know that, sir," I replied, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "But I've found a new front line. My mission is here now. I can't abandon my post." There was a long silence on the line. I thought he was going to order me to reprimand me. Instead, he just sighed. "Well, Sergeant, it seems you've traded one uniform for another. Good luck to you, Moore. The Army's loss is that vineyard's gain." And just like that, a 10-year chapter of my life came to a close. Telling my family was easier and harder at the same time. Dad simply nodded, a deep, quiet pride in his eyes that was more powerful than any words. Aunt Sophia cried, hugging me tightly, a flood of relief that I was staying for good. The community, when they heard the news, treated me not as a hero, but as one of their own who had finally, truly come home. Their quiet acceptance was the only validation I needed. With my future now irrevocably tied to the vineyard, the upcoming trial took on a new weight. It wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about securing the future I had just chosen. We spent the next month in intensive preparation with the prosecuting attorneys. They were a sharp, dedicated team who understood that the heart of their case wasn't the chemical analysis or the financial records. It was our story. They prepped us for the brutal cross-examinations to come, for the ways Sterling's high-priced defense attorneys would try to twist our words, attack our credibility, and paint us as opportunistic liars. "They will try to make this about Noah," the lead prosecutor, a woman named Chen, warned me during one of our sessions. "They will portray you as a dysfunctional family, a failing business that tried to frame a legitimate developer to cover your own incompetence. You have to be ready for that." The trial began on a crisp autumn day. We traveled to the federal courthouse in San Francisco, a small, tight-lipped contingent from the Valley. Seeing Marcus Hayes in the courtroom was jarring. He was impeccably dressed, flanked by a team of lawyers who looked like they were carved from marble. He exuded an aura of untouchable confidence, smiling at the jury as if they were all old friends. He looked at me, at my family, with a dismissive smirk. We were a mere inconvenience. The prosecution laid out its case with methodical precision, starting with the fire and Noah's confession, establishing a pattern of predatory interest in our land. They brought in Evan Rourke, the contractor, who, in exchange for a plea deal, testified that Hayes had hired him for aggressive security and observation. He denied setting the fire or sabotaging the nursery, but he placed Hayes's direct oversight at the scene of the conflict. Then, one by one, my neighbors took the stand. Ramon Garcia spoke with simple, powerful honesty about Hayes's attempt to buy him off. Mr. Henderson, his voice trembling but resolute, told the story of losing his home. Sarah described the campaign of legal harassment. Through them, the jury began to see not a corporation, but a community. My turn on the stand was grueling. Hayes's lead defense attorney, a famously ruthless litigator, came at me with everything he had. He brought up my military record, twisting my leadership during the fire into an act of hysterical overreaction. He tried to paint me as a disgruntled soldier, an outsider who came home to stir up trouble. He zeroed in on Noah, on the debts, on the insurance policy. "Isn't it true, Sergeant Moore," he sneered, "that your family's business was on the brink of bankruptcy long before Sterling Properties ever showed an interest? Isn't it true that your brother, a known gambler, had already tried to burn the place down? Isn't this whole elaborate story just a desperate attempt to cash in on a family tragedy?" I looked at him, and then I looked at the jury. I didn't let my anger show. I just held their gaze. "My brother made a terrible mistake for which he is paying the price," I said, my voice clear and even. "He was a desperate man, and your client's company preyed on that desperation. But what happened after that had nothing to do with my brother. This case isn't about one man's weakness. It's about a company's greed. It's about the poisoning of our water. It's about the belief that money gives you the right to destroy people's homes." I leaned forward slightly. "You can attack my family, you can attack my service, but you cannot change the chemistry of the water in that reservoir. You cannot change the poison in my fields. Those are facts, and they are the facts that matter." The turning point came with the testimony of the manager from the Fresno warehouse. On the stand, he was a nervous, sweating wreck. He detailed the cash transaction, the burner phone, the man he knew as Mr. Smith. The prosecution then presented the cell tower data, the phone records, the financial link, however thin, between the shell company and Sterling's legal network. They built a cage of circumstantial evidence around Marcus Hayes, bar by meticulous bar. The final witness was a surprise, even to us. It was a young woman, a former junior accountant at Sterling Properties. She had come forward after reading about the case, her conscience finally outweighing her fear. She presented the court with internal expense reports she had personally processed, reports for a special projects fund controlled directly by Hayes. The reports were coded, but she had kept the key. They showed payments to Agro Solutions LLC. They showed payments to Evan Rurk, and they showed a final, massive success fee scheduled to be paid to a holding company upon the confirmed bankruptcy or foreclosure of the Sonoma target asset. Our vineyard. It was the smoking gun. In the courtroom, you could feel the air shift. Marcus Hayes's confident smirk finally vanished, replaced by the pale, slack-jawed expression of a man who has just seen his entire world collapse. The jury was out for less than 5 hours. The verdict came back on a Friday afternoon. Guilty, on all major counts. Conspiracy, racketeering, and 27 violations of the Federal Clean Water Act. A collective gasp, then a quiet sob of relief, went through the gallery where our community sat. I looked at my dad. Tears were streaming freely down his face. I took his hand. It was over. We had won. Marcus Hayes was led away, no longer a titan of industry, just a convicted felon. We walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, late afternoon sun. We were no longer victims. We were no longer plaintiffs. We were survivors. The war was over. And now, the long, hopeful work of rebuilding could truly begin. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The victory in the courtroom was not a boisterous celebration, but a deep, collective exhale. The legal battle had been a necessary war, but it had been fought on foreign soil, in courtrooms and lawyers' offices. The real peace, the true victory, could only be found back home, in the soil of our valley. The court case had massive repercussions. Sterling Properties, gutted by fines and its reputation shattered, was forced into bankruptcy. As part of the settlement in our civil suit, the court awarded our co-op a significant financial judgment. It wasn't just enough to cover our debts. It was enough to rebuild, to invest, to dream. But the most significant part of the judgment was not the money. At Ben Carter's insistence, a landmark provision was included. Sterling's remaining land assets in the state were to be placed into a trust, managed by a board of environmentalists and community leaders, with the express purpose of creating affordable farmland for new, independent agriculturalists. Our fight had not only saved our own home, but it had also created a firewall to protect others. With our future secure, we turned our attention back to the land. The first task was healing. Guided by environmental scientists, we undertook a massive bioremediation project to cleanse the reservoir and the soil. It was a slow, expensive process involving specialized cover crops and microbial treatments. It was a penance for the land, a way of earning back its trust. During this time of healing, a letter arrived from a state correctional facility. It was from Noah. His trial had concluded quietly while ours had been raging. He had been sentenced to 5 years, with parole possible in 3. Mila, I followed the trial. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted to say thank you. Not for saving me, but for saving our home. You did what I was never strong enough to do. You fought. Dad writes to me. He tells me about what you're building. It sounds like a better place than the one I left. Maybe one day, when I've paid my debt, I can see it for myself. Not as a son or a brother, but just as a man who wants to see what grows from the ashes. I folded the letter. The anger I had held for so long had faded, replaced by a quiet, distant sorrow. His path was his own, but for the first time, I felt a flicker of hope that he might one day find his way back to the light. The following spring was a season of rebirth unlike any the valley had ever seen. The soil was declared clean, the reservoir teemed with new life, and we began to plant. We didn't just replant what had been lost, we diversified. We planted new varietals, an olive grove on the sunniest hill, and a small, organic vegetable farm managed by the Garcia family. The centerpiece of our new vineyard was the Phoenix Vine Project. The Charbono grafts, which we had protected with the fierce devotion of parents, were finally ready. We held a planting ceremony. Every member of the co-op, from the oldest to the youngest, placed a vine into the rich, dark earth. It was a silent, sacred promise between the people and the land. In the years that followed, the Moore family vineyard wasn't just rebuilt, it was reborn. It became the heart of a thriving agricultural cooperative, a model for sustainable, community-based farming. Our new tasting room, built from reclaimed wood and powered by solar panels, became a destination. People didn't just come for the wine, they came to hear the story. They came to be a part of something that had refused to die. Our Phoenix Vine Charbono became our signature wine, a cult favorite praised for its deep, complex character. Each bottle told our story of survival and resilience. It was more than a wine, it was a testament. I found my place, not in an office, but with my boots on the ground. I discovered I had a talent for the logistics of farming, for seeing the vineyard as a complex, interconnected system, not so different from a military unit. My days were filled with the rhythms of the seasons, pruning, tending, and harvesting. It was a different kind of service, but it was just as profound. One golden autumn evening, years after the trial, I stood on the porch with Dad. He was older now, leaning more heavily on his cane, but his eyes were bright, filled with a deep, peaceful contentment. We watched the setting sun paint the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting a warm glow over the thriving rows of vines. The laughter of our neighbors' children drifted up from the valley floor. You know, Dad said, his voice soft. For years, I was obsessed with legacy. With the Moore name on a bottle of wine, I thought that was the most important thing. I was wrong. He turned to me, his gaze clear and full of love. This is the legacy, he said, gesturing not just to our fields, but to the entire valley, alive and peaceful. It's not about a name, it's about the land. It's about the community you built. It's about the hope you planted in the ashes. I looked out at the land, my land. I thought of the long, hard road we had traveled, the fire, the betrayals, the fear, the fight. Every hardship had been a forge, shaping us, strengthening us, binding us together. My military career had taught me how to fight, how to lead in the face of chaos, how to triage a wound. But this valley, this community, they had taught me what I was fighting for. They taught me how to heal. They taught me how to grow. The uniform was packed away in a trunk, a relic of a former life. But the mission had never truly ended. It had simply come home. Here, under the California sky, surrounded by my family, my community, and the stubborn, beautiful land we had saved together, I had finally found my peace. I was no longer just Sergeant Moore. I was Mila. And I was home. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat.